So to get started, and I know I sent you a few questions ahead of time, I'm going to stick with them, but the first one I'm going to change up a little bit. Maybe just some background, like when did you start running? How'd you get interested, and then proceed into like how did you realize that maybe you were pretty good at it?
Yeah, I think I have a pretty classic story. I started running in high school. My dad was a good runner. He ran for a year at Franklin College back in the day, and so I knew there was some family, some genetic talent, I guess. And so my freshman year at the International School of Indiana, I just kind of went out for the team. I had played football in middle school, and then I think I realized that I just didn't really have that in me to do in high school. And so I switched to cross country and just kind of, didn't take it super seriously and had fun with it, but was lucky enough to improve every year, and kind of the same trajectory. Once I got to DePaul University, I just, continually took it a little more seriously and showed some improvement to the point where I, kind of knew I had at least at some kind of baseline talent level for it.
Excellent. And then once you started to realize that you had that talent, like how did that and start having some success, how that change your relationship with the sport, right? Because it's something you've done for fun, and you start realizing, hey, I'm pretty good at this. So as that evolved, how did things begin to change?
Yeah, I mean, it was a pretty natural progression. I'm a competitive person in my running, at least. And so I really enjoyed racing, and I enjoyed the process of training. And I think running is one of the very few things where, you put in some time every day or every other day, whatever you're willing to give to it. And those results come back to you, like the work you put in shows itself in the final product. And I don't think there's many other things in life that are so black and white and so concrete. The amount of work you put in, that's the result that you get out of it more often than not. And so I really love that about running. And so, yeah, I mean, I improved enough in high school to run in college. And after college, I kind of thought that the competitive side of the sport may be done for me, but eventually I just realized how much I loved to train, and I loved the process of training. And I didn't think that I had totally discovered the outer limit of my potential. And so that was kind of the motivation behind my move to Colorado, is I wanted to come out here and put myself in the absolute best situation to get the most out of my running and see kind of where the end of the road really was. And I was lucky that I had a little more talent than I had even suspected, and the results came fairly quickly.
No, that's outstanding. I know all of us, a lot. I loved your points about, it's something where, right, if you put in the work, you see the results. So it doesn't matter, what level you're at, how fast you are, whether you're walking, running. That is the very cool thing, right? It's oftentimes you against yourself, and then get to the starting line, you against others. And I know that's something that I enjoy about it, because I can just see how I achieve things personally. You mentioned, training, so I'm going to jump around in some of the questions I sent you. Describe a typical training week looks like when you're like training for an upcoming event. For those of us, I know that's always a question. I wonder how many miles these folks run. So maybe a typical training week.
Yeah, I mean, it fluctuates depending on the time of year, but say one of my big training weeks leading up to the marathon in December, I was running about 110 miles a week. And so that would, on an easy day or like a non-workout day, that would usually be a 10-mile run in the morning and then a 4 or 5 mile run in the afternoon. On more of a quality workout day, I'd meet up with my team. I trained with a group called the Roots Running Project here in Boulder, and could be anything, mile repeats to tempo runs, something like that. Usually around 13 or 14 miles of total volume. So yeah, I mean, I'm trying to get around 15 or 16 miles a day. Some days are easy, some days are higher quality workouts, and then a long run on Sundays, which I think is probably familiar to a lot of people, where I'm going to run 20 to 23 miles, something like that. Now I'm not doing that much, but in the prep for a big race like that, that's about the volume that I'm doing.
Okay. And a follow-up to that, and someone asked in the chat too, can you share a little bit? I mean, do you like cross training you do? Like, do you do any strength training, other things besides run?
In terms of cross training, when I'm when I'm really kind of in the deep end of training for marathons and running twice a day every day, there's not really any time for cross training. But now I'm running more like 70 or 80 miles a week, and so that's still quite a bit of running. But
Sure.
on days when I don't feel like going for a second run, or maybe I decide to take a day off just to rest my body, I'll hop on the road bike and ride for an hour or two, just kind of for fun. That's about the extent of my cross training. Strength training, I do a fair amount. After my hard running workouts, I'll do some kind of strength circuit for the most part. But I should probably be doing that more than I do for somebody at this level. But it's never been like a huge priority for me, if I'm honest.
Well, it's good to see that at your level it's the same thing, because I know at our level it becomes the same thing in terms of the priorities.
I always tell people I'm 2 core workouts a week from being like a 207 marathoner, but I don't know if I'm ever going to do it.
That's awesome. Well, I know you mentioned the marathon project, and I led with that. Maybe talk a little bit about that experience and what it was like for those that maybe weren't familiar with, the objective and sort of, how they put that whole thing together.
Yeah, so the marathon project was elite or professional, however you want to categorize that, only event that was held in Chandler, Arizona, on a closed road. And so there were 50 men and 50 women, something like that. We did loops of the course. I was, first of all, just very grateful to have an opportunity to race. That was the only race that I did in 2020. And so I was really grateful to have something to work towards and have an event set up where we could test kind of the outer limits of our marathon potential. And so we were lucky that, we had a nice flat loop course. We had pacemakers that set the tempo up front for us and really just had great conditions to run fast. And so it was one of those, I call them no excuses days, where, there's no one you can blame but yourself if it doesn't go well. And so I just decided to kind of, swing for the fences, and I got lucky that the wheels didn't fall off until the very end. And so, I was really grateful to have that experience.
That's awesome. No, gosh, what an accomplishment. And again, folks, feel free to, if you've got questions, type them into the chat, and then we'll open up for questions at the end. I know we alluded a little bit this to the weight training, right? You said you're two core workouts away from being a 207, but like the rest of us, are there times where you lose motivation? Like, gosh, I don't want to go do this today. And if so, like, how do you overcome that?
Yeah, I mean, I lose motivation constantly. It's like, it's on a day-to-day basis sometimes. I mean, especially in a year like 2020, where, until the end of the year, there were no concrete opportunities. And for the first time in my competitive career, there were no concrete goals or opportunities that I had to take advantage of. And so at that point, when you're kind of stripped down to like the bare essentials, I just had to come to the realization that I enjoyed running. And so some days I would just go for a run for running's sake and not really follow the training plan, but just get my shoes on. And I mean, sometimes I'd run for 5 minutes, turn around and come home, and that was enough. And so motivation no one is motivated all the time, right? Like, I think it's easy to look at Instagram or look at all these people and be like, oh, they must be motivated all the time, but it's not like that for anybody. And so I just, if I have a goal coming up, I try to stay focused on that goal. And on the days when I don't want to run, I'm like, well, I'll be glad that I did it. When it comes to the race day, I'll look back and I'll know that, on the days when I didn't want to do it, I did it. But I also know that sometimes it's better for my mental health just to listen to that voice and to not run and just, go for a walk with my family or something else, and so I spend so much of the year so hyper focused and dedicated to my running, but to do that, you need to rest at the appropriate intervals as well.
Oh, that makes total sense. I know, and sometimes, right, habit, I think, coming into play, right? Like, it's something, one, you've got to go out there and do the habit. I know Matt Ebersol, who I know you know well, I remember telling him about a year ago, I said, Matt, I've lost my mojo. And he said, the heck with your mojo. Just get out there and start running, right? Like, it is right. Like, I never usually don't, and I think all of us could attest this. We don't ever go, most of us have never gone and come back and said, that really wish I wouldn't have done that today, right? You tend to feel better. You may have a good run or a bad run, but you tend to feel better because you got out there and did it. And I know when I started running 12 years ago, the person who started helping me out said the hardest part of this gym is walking through the front door. After
Yeah.
that, it gets pretty easy. And I found that valuable. So appreciate, I know we all do to hear that. Yeah, everybody at times loses that motivation.
Just got to get the shoes on.
Exactly. Someone has asked in the chat, when in the marathon project race did you realize you were about to accomplish something really special?
Well, in the marathon, it's such a long race that you really have to decide what pace you're going out at and try to stick to it. And so we had decided as a group that we were going to run 4:55 pace until we couldn't anymore. And just kind of roll the dice and see what happened. And so I remember coming through halfway and like 64:25, 104:25, something like that, and knowing that I could still run a little further. And I think once you get past the half marathon, you just check mile by mile off. And I just did my best to kind of let my mind switch off. And, eventually I got to mile 20 and I was feeling horrible, but I realized that, if I could just keep running for another 30 minutes, I was going to do something really special. And at that point, I was thinking about just if I can curse here, all the shit that I had been through for the last year in my running, and just like how hard I had worked for this opportunity. And even that day, how hard I had worked for that opportunity. And just like my worst fear was letting it slip away at the very end because I quit on myself. And so I was really doing my best not to quit on myself. And at that point, you're just kind of desperately searching for the finish line. And so I didn't really take much time to reflect. I was really just trying to, get the performance locked away and then deal with the number afterwards.
Excellent. And it was a good number.
It was a good number. I got lucky that way.
Have you find yourself sometimes challenged to maybe manage your own goals versus maybe goals or expectations, real or perceived, that maybe others place on you? I mean, do you find that a challenge?
I would say it was a challenge earlier in my professional career where, once I signed my first professional contract, I thought I all of a sudden had to live up to the expectations of a professional athlete. And I didn't even know what those expectations were. I just knew that it was probably more than what I was doing at the time. But, I kind of had to work my way through that process and realize that running is a really deeply personal journey. It's about exploring your own potential, and no one can set those limits on you. They're set by you. You're the one who controls the limits that you put on you. And so, at the very essence of my running, my only goal has ever been to get better. And that, though I've never put a number on that, I've just wanted to improve in some way year over year. And maybe that means one of my personal best comes down, or maybe it just means that I have a healthier approach to running, or I do certain things better. And so I think I went through this process of running just for me, and then trying to run for other people, and then coming back to realize that, well, it's great if I can inspire other people with my running, or if people find some kind of meaning in my individual journey as a runner, I still have to do it for me, because that's where I derive the most happiness.
Excellent. No, thanks for sharing that. Here's another question that has come through on the chat. Do you have a favorite pre-race and post-race foods?
Yeah, I mean, pre-race is more of like a utilitarian meal. It's not really I'm ever eating anything because I enjoy it, but I just usually it's just oatmeal in the morning with some sugar and peanut butter like a few hours before, but I don't like to race with a whole lot in my stomach. So really just enough so that I'm not hungry when the race starts. In terms of post-race, it kind of depends on how the race goes. And at the race in December, I really destroyed my stomach, as I think people can understand, what the marathon can do to you. And I couldn't eat solid food for 24 hours after that. I couldn't eat at all. And so I was really in kind of a bad way, but if I'm lucky enough to come through the race kind of unscathed, I like the pretty typical like burger or pizza or just something greasy, and I'll usually have a few beers afterwards too if I can stomach it.
Awesome. Wow, 24 hours. That's tough. That is tough.
Yeah, I was a wreck. It wasn't particularly pleasant.
It doesn't sound like it. What, couple more questions and I'll open it up. So we have runners and walkers both as part of our group. What tips would you give runners and walkers on how to be successful, both while training and then on race day?
I mean, in terms of training, it's all about consistency. There are no magic days, there are no special runs or magic paces or anything like that. It's really about just committing yourself to the craft. And so if you have, say your goal is to run or walk 3 or 4 times a week or whatever, you just have to be consistent with that goal, and just know that, committing to this practice over time yields results. And that's the only key to success. And distance running or walking is consistency. That's the only thing that matters, in my opinion. And then, when it comes down to race day, if you have been able to achieve that consistency, you just have to have faith in what you've done, and know that you did the work, and that the race is your opportunity to showcase that work. And more than it is a challenge, it will be challenging, but it's also a celebration of everything that went into that moment. And so, when I ran that marathon in December, that race lasted 2 hours, but I've been running 100 miles a week for 6 months, before that. And so it's that accumulation of hours and the accumulation of miles that kind of comes down to this one day you have circled on the calendar. And obviously there's some pressure associated with that because you want to do well, but more than anything, it's just like, I think people need to get to the start line and kind of give themselves a pat on the back and be like, man, I made it. I made it this far, because not everybody does. Very few people do.
No, that's awesome. We're this group in the training for, we're training for a number of events. The focus always for this one is usually the mini marathon, and that's been, moved to virtual again. So we are going to putting together a virtual, course for folks. And as you said, with, COVID last year and continuing to mess up everything, right? That's been a struggle to find those events and to get, to complete that journey, right? Sort of like, chasing a moving target, or someone told me like chasing a moving target and you find out the target's not there when you finally get there. That's the way it's been.
Yeah.
So it's nice to see races starting to open back up again. One more question I have, and then I'll open it up for folks. What's the next race you're training for now, or what's on the horizon for Noah?
I took a good long break after the marathon in December, and then when I did start running, I had a little injury in my knee, and so I really decided to be patient and not force anything and just allow myself to come back to full health. And so now I'm feeling good and running healthy, but I don't like to really put anything on the calendar until I'm totally like physically and psychologically ready to commit to it, because I understand that commitment is a big deal. And so I don't want to do it until I'm ready. And so I'm just now getting to that place where I feel ready to commit to stuff. But like you said, there's not a whole lot of opportunities that are set in stone. And so I just signed on to run a fall marathon. I can't say which one yet, but that's going to be my big commitment, is another marathon in the fall. I'm heading to Toledo, Ohio tomorrow to run the Glass City half marathon, but I'm not really racing it. I'll be pacing my fiance in the women's race.
Oh, nice.
And so that'll be fun, and just kind of I'm obviously, it's not a competitive goal for me, but she's racing it competitively. And so it'll be fun to kind of work together for that. And, I might run on the track later this summer. It's pretty up in the air for me right now.
No, I appreciate you sharing what you did, and it's cool that you're going to get a chance to pace your fiance. That's awesome.
Yeah, it'll be cool. We've done stuff like that before, and it's not always great in the short term for our relationship, but in the long term, we're always glad that we did it.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
There's a question that came in from the chat. As I told you, we're having a freak snowstorm here right now, Noah. So on race day, what do you do to mentally overcome challenging weather?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about challenging weather is that everybody is going through it. And so if you're approaching the race from a competitive mindset, it's like, well, you know, can I endure these conditions as much as the next guy? And I like to think the answer is yes. The other thing to understand is, like, I think as runners, we're always very committed to pace goals, and we want to finish the race at a certain pace and in a certain time. And we lose track of effort as a barometer. And so, you know, if, like we saw in the Boston Marathon a couple of years ago, like those runners all had pace goals, but then they woke up that morning and they had a 40-mile-an-hour headwind and the driving rain. And so all of a sudden the emphasis has to shift then to, like, okay, how can I do my best over these 26 miles when pace is irrelevant? Because anybody who set off at their goal pace for great weather was going to have a horrible day. They just weren't going to make it. And so I think you just have to have faith that, like, okay, I'm in shape, and you have to, like, kind of check your ego at the door and be like, well, maybe I don't need to be so adherent to this pace that I had been training for, and just instead find satisfaction in the fact that I can run the appropriate effort, and I can still do my best, and I can still fight these conditions, and the time on the clock might not be what I want at the end, but I'll still have that same satisfaction knowing that I gave it everything over the full distance of the race.
No, that's great advice. Yeah, that's awesome. You know, not being locked in on that pace when the weather conditions are, like you said, in Boston, the way they were a few years ago. So that's awesome advice. Another question that came in: any running mentors or running heroes you've had along the way who've shaped your approach to training? And the question said, and please don't feel pressured to say Jesse Davis.
No, I mean, to talk about Jesse specifically, like, he definitely, I remember watching him when he was trying to qualify for the 2016 Olympic trials in the marathon at Indy Monumental, and the cutoff was 2:19, and he'd run so close to that so many times. And I was standing there as he barreled down the home stretch and dove at the finish line and ran, 2:18:59. And just seeing the passion he put into that run was really inspiring to me. So, I mean, yeah, so there's a quick Jesse story. And so that was really awesome, and definitely a running moment that I remember. In terms of other mentors, I think most of the time mentors are the people closest to you. And so Brian Power, who was my high school coach my senior year, who really told me, like, hey, you can run in college, where that had never crossed my mind before. I just thought running ended in high school. And so he allowed me to believe that I could run in college. And then in college, my head coach, Corey Stoffrigan, I still remember one practice where he pulled me over my sophomore year, and he was like, hey, Noah, like, you can be an All-American in cross country. And that thought had never crossed my mind. And all of a sudden, when he gave that goal to me, and he believed in me, it allowed me to kind of reach, further than I would have otherwise. And so those are two very, like, personal mentors, but I'm a big fan of running as a sport in general. And I take a lot of inspiration from things that other professionals have done, but also, as I've been in the sport for a long time, I take a lot of inspiration from just kind of everyday people that I meet who maybe have been running every day after work for 5 years or whatever, and making their running and training work on schedules that sound insane to me, because, like, my job is running, right? So all I have to do when I wake up is get my training in. Like, that's a pretty cushy lifestyle. But I get a lot of inspiration from normal people who are juggling life and still getting in their running. It kind of puts my own training in perspective.
Awesome. I appreciate that answer. We are about almost to the bottom of the hour. I'm going to throw it out to anybody else online. If any questions, feel free you can come off mute if you want to, or type in the chat, or any questions or comments. Jeff, I saw your hand first, and I'll go to Nina.
Noah, do you have a favorite race or two? Which one did you run that you just felt like, oh, that was spectacular, and why?
In terms of my own performance, or just the race as a whole?
Whether it was your performance or anything else that you thought was, oh, this was, whether it was like I don't know if you pay attention to scenery when you're running, but or the experience itself, what was, something like that.
A couple of race memories, I guess I'll always carry with me. I ran the Olympic trials on the track in the 10,000 meters in 2016 at the old historic Hayward Field in Eugene, Oregon. And I had bought tickets the year prior to go and watch that race as a spectator. But I ended up qualifying for the race and getting, kind of a front row seat by actually participating. And that was very wild. And I had this really beautiful moment when I was doing my strides before the race where I ran down the home stretch and found my parents in the stands in the seats that I had bought a ticket for my dad. We were going to go watch it together. But when I qualified for the race, I gave my ticket to my mom. And so I was able to go find them in the stands. And, I ran horribly in the race. I finished dead last. It was one of the worst races of my career. But that moment was really special and something I'll always remember because it's not a place I ever expected to be. And so that's one that stands out. I mean, every race is special in its own way. Like the first year I ran the Chicago Marathon, I'd never been to a world marathon major before. And so I was really blown away by the crowds and the noise and the excitement along the course, which I think a lot of people who have run any of the majors can understand. And so those moments are kind of addictive. Like you want to be in those big race atmospheres. But I have equally fond memories of just running local races in Indianapolis, like the Pleasant Run, which goes through historic Irvington where I grew up. Like, I have equally fond memories of doing that. And so there, some stick with you for weird reasons.
Thanks for that answer. And Nina?
Yeah, so one of the things that I find really appealing about running is that people like me can actually compete against people like you. We have no chance of ever beating you, but it's kind of fun that we are in the same event as Olympians. And so often people like you, you double or triple your time and then you get my time. So on an out and back course, you're coming back and I am just getting started. So people like me are screaming, go, go, and you're the lead and you're amazing and all this. And do you hear that? And is it annoying or is it encouraging or what?
It's definitely not annoying. I would say for like in a typical race scenario, it's very tunnel vision. And in terms of like the crowds on the side, I'm able to process very little. But I love, to your point, I love when races double back. And so the front of the race is passing the back of the race because every time that's ever happened, like race participants are cheering so loud. And they're very enthusiastic fans. And those, like, I definitely hear because one, you guys are right next to us in the other lane of traffic a lot of times, but it's really motivating because I've had that moment where I'm running, I'm just like, wow, these people are cheering for me and they're out here racing right now too. But they're like, it's very flattering that people will take a second out of their race to cheer for me, which is cool. And also running is kind of a selfish thing a lot of times, like we're running our races for us, but in those moments you kind of get a glimpse of the collective and realize that we're all out here doing the same thing regardless of pace. And I think that has kind of a lifting effect and helps me take my race like a little bit less seriously and realize that there's more joy in it than maybe I'm feeling at a certain time. And so, yeah, I love that. I love coming back and hearing race participants cheer for the front of the race. It's really cool. Just like one brief aside, if I can, like at the New York City half marathon, there's a stretch when you come, I forget where exactly, it's near Times Square, but when the pro field gets to a certain point, they start a kids race and the kids run a mile. And so for a certain period of time, the kids are, you know, blasting off down one lane of traffic next to the professional field in the half marathon. And so you look over and there's like a 6-year-old just like going as fast as they can. And so like little moments like that are really fun and unique and just something you don't get in any other sport, really.
That's awesome. So Nina, it sounds like we can continue to cheer when we're on those races, cheering for
Please-
people when they come
please
back by
do.
that.
Yeah, please do.
Anything else before I let Noah go here? Well, Noah, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate. Oh, here's one more coming in. Are you going to try for the Olympics again?
Yeah, so the marathon's my main event. The Olympic trials were in February, and unfortunately I missed that with an injury, a really poorly timed injury. And so I didn't get a chance to get out there and compete for that spot. I'm 30 years old. I'll be 34 when the next Olympic cycle rolls around for the marathon. And so I think I'll have one more chance. And so I'm hoping to be in a position to take advantage of that and give it one more go. Like the Olympics kind of govern this sport. But I've found fulfillment in my career not having made it yet. And so, but I'll give it a go. Like that's the dream. And so I think I have one more chance.
Well, we will all be pulling for you that and in other races as well. Jeff, one more question.
I have instead an announcement.
Okay.
Oh,
So as the Indy Runners, Indy Walkers Half Marathon Spring Training Program Coordinator, or my short title, which is Fun Meister, I would like to announce that we now have a confirmed starting point and ending point for our virtual in-person Indy Mini race on May the 8th, Saturday at 8 a.m. We're going to start at Cathedral High School at 56th Street, and we're going to climb on the Fall Creek Trail, and we're going to run the Fall Creek Trail down to Kessler Park, which is at 25th and Meridian, and we're going to run back to Cathedral High School. And there's only 2 street crossings there. We're not expecting a huge number of people there. We're not going to have 25,000 people like in the Indy Mini. We're going to have, whatever, 40 or 50 Indy runners and Indy walkers. But for those of you on the call here, you're all invited, including you, Noah. That would be great to have you there. I'm pretty sure you could win this one. And but we're really excited to do something in person for the race, and there's a lot of people that have been really challenged by trying to be motivated to train for what is going to be a virtual half marathon. And so we have a way to try to get a few people together. And so Cathedral has been very kind to allow us to use their parking lot to park and to set up our tent and our coolers. And so get some people out there and join us May 8th at 8 a.m. at Cathedral for a half marathon race or whatever you want to do.
That'll be awesome. No, I know it's a lot of people looking forward to that. And know that there's one more question, and I'm not going to let him ask anymore. Have you ever had any pizza that compares to Giacomo's?
How could anything compare to Giacomo? I was the original, the very first busboy ever at Giacomo Pizza.
So there's a fun fact.
There's a fun fact, yeah.
Well, again, I appreciate you, your accomplishments, 2, joining us, but you're, just telling the down home stories, right? Just being transparent and talking, sharing about what, you feel about racing and other people cheering you on, and, some of the stories you shared. I truly appreciate this, and I know the others will too. We'll put it out for folks to watch online, but we wish you continued success. We're cheering for you. You're our local hero. So whether it's the Olympics or the half marathon in Toledo, we're behind you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I really appreciate you guys having me. I enjoyed it.
Excellent. Thanks. And thank you all for joining.
See ya. Take care.
All right.